In June of 2023, 2 muggings occurred within the space of roughly 48 hours in different areas of Medellin, Colombia, a city which owed much of its worldwide recognition to the exploits of notorious drug baron Pablo Escobar. From the 1970s to the early 1990s, an unnamed Polish couple recorded themselves as they were trekking Cerro El Volador, a ridge in the city. As the man was talking about their day into the frontal camera of his phone, a man was captured creeping up behind them. Moments later, he and an accomplice ambushed the couple. One of them placed his hand over the woman's mouth while the other put her partner in a chokehold. The duo was then mugged at knife point. A second video uploaded by the male victim showed him with blood all over his face, explaining that he'd just been attacked and hit in the head with a knife. Roughly 2 days later, surveillance cameras captured 3 miniskirt-clad women attacking a British tourist on the street and trying to wrestle off his backpack. As bystanders looked on, one of the assailants punched the man in the head repeatedly, and the trio even forced him to the ground at one point as he desperately struggled to shake them off. As reported by El Tiempo, the trio managed to steal the victim's high-end mobile phone, among other items. The police tracked the muggers' subsequent movements through CCTV. Major Adrian Chacon, inspection officer of the Valle de Aboria Metropolitan Police, reported that they were intercepted and arrested not far from where the attack had taken place. The tourist's stolen possessions were reportedly returned to him. According to El Tiempo, there were 230 theft complaints from tourists in Medellin in the first quarter of 2023, representing a 666% increase compared to the same period in 2022. Number 6. Charles Hendry and Leah Parks. In July of 2013, English couple Charles Hendry and Leah Parks from Manchester went on a romantic getaway to Ibiza. During their time on the Spanish island, the couple befriended drug dealer Adib Asfour and became involved in the party drug scene, selling illegal substances to revelers. Photos would show the couple drinking and dancing at some of Ibiza's best-known nightclubs, as they also carried out their dealings. Hendry, who was at the time in his late 20s, had experience in high-pressure situations, having previously served in the Royal Marines with tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. In the aftermath of his service, he worked as a bodyguard for celebrities and businessmen. Upon their return to the UK, Hendry and Parks continued being involved in the drug trade and laid the groundwork for a major deal, operating from the Holiday Inn Express Hotel in Acton Gate, Stafford, in the fall of 2013. From a warehouse in Brown Hills in the West Midlands, Hendry collected nearly 35 kilos of MDMA, an ecstasy-style drug. He transferred them into 2 suitcases and wheeled them into their hotel room, which had been booked by Parks. Asfour arrived at the Holiday Inn and minutes later departed, carrying Parks' shoulder bag, which was holding several kilos of MDMA. He was subsequently arrested. The couple, who were also being monitored by the police, left the hotel with a suitcase but were stopped by officers while traveling southbound on the M6. Their suitcase was found to contain 16 airtight packets of MDMA, and an additional 19 packets were found in their hotel room. The total street value of the drugs in their possession was over £1 million. At Stafford Crown Court, Hendry, Parks and Asfour pleaded not guilty to conspiring to supply controlled Class A drugs, but were convicted in October of 2014. The following year, Parks was handed a 7-year sentence, while Hendry and Asfour were jailed for 10 years each. Number 5. Julie Diane Williams. In December of 2017 in Lagos, Nigeria, American exotic dancer Julie Diane Williams was introduced to Bright Udiagbe, also known as Big Slim, a businessman who owned nightclubs, hotels and restaurants in Nigeria and Ghana. Williams and 2 other American exotic dancers, identified as Sky and Diana, began a working relationship with Udi Agbe and performed on commission at his gentleman's club in Lagos for a period of 4 weeks. The women returned to the US after the Christmas holidays. Williams was also an Instagram model known as Tiger Booty, a moniker reportedly linked to the tattoo of a tiger stretching across her hips. She worked at Udi Agbe's club again in 2018, but couldn't do so in the years that followed due to COVID-19 travel restrictions. The businessman then invited the 37-year-old back to Nigeria in 2021, and she arrived in the country on November the 26th. Udi Agbe was at the time in Ghana, where he was in the process of opening a restaurant and a gentleman's club in the capital city, Accra. At the businessman's invitation, Williams traveled to Ghana to assist him in his efforts on December the 3rd. After testing positive for COVID-19 and spending time in an isolation center, she was picked up by Udi Agbe, who paid for her accommodation at the Ray Porsche Hotel in the Abelenkepe suburb of Accra. Williams checked out on December the 12th with the intention of traveling back to Nigeria, but visa issues prevented her from doing so, and she returned to Ray Porsche on the same day, checking into the same room. On December the 14th, staff attempting to serve the model breakfast called Room 101 several times, but received no answer. Management then checked the door, which was unlocked, and upon entering the room, found Williams unresponsive. She was rushed to a local hospital where she was pronounced dead. A post-mortem examination conducted by a police pathologist concluded that her demise had been due to unnatural causes. As of 2024, Williams' death remained a mystery. Updates from January of 2022 indicated that Udi Agbe and Susan Azor, an employee of his who'd been in contact with Williams, had been arrested in connection to her death, along with 3 Ray Porsche Hotel employees. Their charges and degree of involvement remained unclear, and law enforcement waited for the result of an autopsy to proceed with the case. Williams' family, however, reportedly requested that the procedure be performed in the US, expressing a distrust of the authorities in Ghana, given the lack of palpable progress in the case. Number 4. Stacey Addison. In the fall of 2014, Oregon veterinarian Stacey Addison visited East Timor in Southeast Asia while on a 2-year solo trip to see wildlife around the world. She had previously traveled to Antarctica and parts of Europe. On September the 5th, while in the East Timor capital city of Dili, Addison shared a cab with a man who was a complete stranger to her. At some point, the man asked the cab driver to stop so that he could pick up a package. The police then swarmed the vehicle, and the package in question was found to contain methamphetamine. Everyone in the cab was arrested. Addison, who had in no way been involved in the drug smuggling operation, was jailed for a few days and then released as local law enforcement proceeded with its investigation. She was ordered to remain in the country. In October, the 41-year-old's conditional release was rescinded, and she was taken to a women's prison in spite of not having been charged or even questioned. Much like in Indonesia, a state which governed the western half of Timor Island, East Timor had some of the strictest anti-drug laws in the world. The country had gained its independence in 2002, and its legal system was still under development, which impeded the progress of the drug case. Addison's ordeal of being incarcerated while alone abroad attracted international attention, and the US made efforts to hasten her release. In spite of mounting pressure and persisting support, it wasn't until late December of 2014 that the woman was freed from prison before returning to the US in early March of 2015. Even though she hadn't committed any crime, Addison had been stranded for 6 months in East Timor, roughly half of which had been in prison. Number 3. Philip Carroll. 23-year-old American tourist Philip Carroll was in Campiana, Italy, in the summer of 2022, where he and 2 relatives were scaling the 4,203-foot Mount Vesuvius volcano. As the only mainland European volcano to have erupted in the past 100 years, Mount Vesuvius rises above the most densely populated volcanic region in the world. With over 600,000 people living in the danger zone, the volcano is best known for leveling the Roman cities of Pompeii, Herculaneum, and several other cities and settlements during a cataclysmic eruption in 79 AD. In spite of the well-documented dangers, Carroll and his companions ventured into an area that was off limits to tourists. They were reportedly trying to take photos at the summit. As Carroll attempted to capture a selfie, he dropped his phone, and while reaching for the device, he slipped and fell into the caldera. Paolo Capelli, president of the Presidio Permanente Vesuvio base, told NBC News that the tourist was very fortunate, as if he kept going he would have plunged 300 meters into the crater. Roughly 1,000 feet had separated Carroll from certain death. He was spotted from guides on the other side of the rim and rescued with a long rope. The young man was reportedly unconscious when they found him, but recovered and refused to be admitted to a hospital, only accepting treatment from paramedics at the scene. Carroll had banged his head in addition to suffering additional cuts and bruises to his arms and back, as shown in social media photos posted by a government tourist official. Carroll was taken into the custody of local law enforcement, but his charges remained unclear. Today's topic was requested by No Vids at All 5546 and Candice Vidito. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Tierra Allen. In May of 2023, American social media influencer Tierra Allen, who'd amassed over 180,000 followers on TikTok under her Sassy Trucker account, and more than 100,000 on Instagram and Facebook combined, was visiting friends in Dubai, UAE. Allen had become popular on social media for documenting her trucking journeys and had been to Dubai multiple times in the past, at one point posting a clip describing herself as the first female truck driver in Dubai. During her latest visit, she and a companion had rented a car and were involved in a minor fender bender that didn't result in any injuries and caused minimal damage to the vehicles. The rental car, which was insured, was seized, and Allen later returned to the rental office to collect her purse and other belongings, which she'd left in the car. According to Allen's version of events, a worker asked her for cash in exchange for the return of her possessions. They argued, and the confrontation devolved into a shouting match. Allen later claimed that it was the worker who'd screamed at her first and even chased her out of the building, threatening to call the cops. The employee, however, maintained that it was Allen who'd become aggressive. The rental office alerted the authorities. Allen was arrested and charged with slandering and defaming the worker with whom she'd argued. As the investigation into the matter progressed, her passport was seized and she was stranded in a Dubai hotel for roughly 3 months. Her plight drew international attention, and many of Allen's followers were outraged since the woman had basically been arrested for shouting, which they deemed as an exaggerated reaction from the authorities. The US Department of State had repeatedly warned tourists traveling to the UAE that the country's decency and morality laws were much stricter than in the US. Public displays of affection, dressing immoderately, and swearing or arguing in public were deemed illegal activities. Allen feared that she would be facing a custodial sentence. Legal advice organization detained in Dubai helped her, calling on her legal representatives, including Congresswoman Sheila Jackson, Lee and Ted Cruz, to liaise with the US consulate in UAE before she ends up in a desert prison. The situation was ultimately resolved. Allen's family paid a $1,360 fee to lift her travel ban, and on August the 8th, she boarded a flight home. Stick around after number 1 if you missed our release about when traveling goes wrong. That's coming up right after. Number 1. Darlene Horton. In the summer of 2017, Florida woman Darlene Horton was visiting London, England, with her husband, Richard. On August the 3rd, she messaged a friend back home to say that she loved the British capital and could spend several more months exploring it. 64-year-old Horton also wrote to her friend that she'd been practicing her tennis and looked forward to a match upon her return. Horton was due to fly back to Florida the following day. On what was supposed to be her last night in London, Horton and her husband were walking through the city when they were caught up in a mass stabbing carried out by 19-year-old Zachariah Bullen in Russell Square. Bullen randomly knifed Horton and 5 other people. All the other victims recovered, but Horton was pronounced dead at the scene. While initially reported as an extremist attack, it was determined that Bullen's attack stemmed from his mental health issues. The Norwegian national of Somali descent had previously been a patient at a psychiatric facility near Russell Square. He admitted Horton's murder and the other attacks in February of 2017 and was sentenced to be detained for an indefinite period in a maximum security hospital. Number 8. Ben Corsa. A British tourist said to have been at the wrong place at the wrong time was gunned down outside a supermarket in Mexico in May of 2022. Ben Corsa, a software engineer from Cornwall, had been traveling through the country since January. In late spring, he was living with a Mexican-American family near the city of Colima in the country's west. The 37-year-old had become friends with 2 young men from the household, Claudio and Alfredo, with whom he would often go skateboarding. The trio was sitting in a car after they picked up groceries at a store on Camino Real Boulevard in Colima. Suddenly and without warning, they were caught in a hail of bullets. Claudio, Alfredo, and Corsa, who was sitting in the back, were all killed in what was reported as an entirely random shooting. There were no signs of a robbery or kidnapping attempt, and the working theory was that the men had either been misidentified or caught in the crossfire of a gang dispute. Colima had experienced a surge of violence in the weeks leading up to the tragedy, but none of it had reportedly been directed at tourists. Number 7. Jordan Taylor. Through a YouTube vlog from September of 2018, an American travel blogger recounted her horrific experience during a trip to India several months earlier. Jordan Taylor noted that towards the end of her 3-week stay in New Delhi, she was harassed on multiple occasions. For most of the trip, Taylor, who went by Travelite on the video sharing platform, was joined by her boyfriend Livio. The first disturbing encounter she experienced was at a hotel, where a group of men grabbed and started groping her in the lobby. In spite of the fact that Livio was right next to her, one of the aggressors reportedly got very close to Taylor's face and explicitly stated that he wanted to have intimate relations with her. In the incident's wake, the couple checked out and opted for the Oyo Hotel on Main Bazaar Road in Pahaganj. Livio's flight was 4 days earlier than Taylor's, and he left early in the morning as the couple deemed it would be safer if no one knew that the young woman would be staying at the hotel unaccompanied. Taylor detailed in her vlog that the staff had begun acting completely different towards her upon realizing that her boyfriend had checked out. Moreover, she accused the hotel of having given out her personal information to a stalker. One man followed her upstairs, while another phoned her room saying, "Hey baby," before hanging up. The calls continued, and 2 days before her flight, one man knocked on the door asking to come into Taylor's room. She refused and then heard him turn off a power switch, after which the man returned claiming that he was there to fix the AC. A similar situation occurred later on when another worker turned off her Wi-Fi. Taylor's vlog has since been viewed over 3.8 million times on YouTube, while the Oyo was reported to have shut down, pending an investigation in the aftermath. Number 6. Alistair Gray. British tourist Alistair Gray was returning to his hotel in Istanbul, Turkey, after a night out to a local bar in May of 2022. As captured by CCTV, 32-year-old Gray was heading towards an underground station when a hooded man followed him and tried to snatch his phone out of his hands. Gray held onto his device and fought back after the mugger punched him in the head. The tourist appeared to land another strike on his attacker, but proceeded to run away when his accomplices attempted to join the brawl. They chased the civil engineer out of the view of surveillance cameras. Gray was then stabbed 7 times, with the most severe of the knife strikes impacting his neck and chest area, before the gang ran off with his phone. He was taken to a hospital in critical condition, but staff were able to stabilize him. Surveillance footage captured in the attack's aftermath showed the gang calmly walking through the streets. 3 of the young men involved in the incident were named as Enis Yoldas, Seyettin Erdem, and Abdurrahman Baydak, while the 4th, reported as underage, was only identified via his initials as UA. The muggers, all of whom had criminal records, were arrested following a raid conducted by local authorities. Number 5. Perique Jamo. Cryptocurrency expert Perique Jamo was visiting New York City from Hong Kong in the spring of 2022. He was getting out of an Uber with his model wife, 26-year-old Sarah Watts, and another female companion. In front of the 50 Hotel and Suites in Manhattan, a gunman approached 33-year-old Jamo and demanded he hand over his 6-figure Richard Mille watch, which the man often displayed on his social media. The robber opened fire before Jamo could react, shooting him multiple times in both legs. The victim's 25-year-old female companion then jumped on the gunman's back. He shook her off, but the intervention prompted him to flee the scene in a getaway BMW without the targeted timepiece. Jamo was taken to the ICU at Bellevue Hospital, where he recovered and subsequently thanked Watts for her support in an Instagram post. The gunman was identified as 35-year-old career criminal Nathaniel Owens, who'd either become aware of the luxury watch through social media or by following the victim. Owens had been arrested 18 times in the past and was on parole for a 2012 weapons conviction at the time of the robbery. He was taken into custody and imprisoned at Rikers Island on charges that included attempted murder. Also charged with the latter, in addition to robbery, assault, and criminal possession of a weapon, was New Jersey woman Whitney Wiggins, who'd acted as Owens' getaway driver. Number 4. Yevgenia Smirnova. Russian webcam performer Yevgenia Smirnova arrived in Phuket, Thailand on May the 25th of 2022. A few days later, she was at the Emerald Terrace condominium complex in Patong, attending a party that local authorities would later claim involved alcohol, intercourse, and illicit substances. At some point during the night, 37-year-old Smirnova climbed on an outside staircase between the 7th and 8th floors. She then plummeted roughly 80 feet to the ground below. The woman was reportedly found wearing just her underwear and suffering from fatal head injuries, in addition to a broken leg. Initially treated as an accident, the death was then investigated under suspicion of foul play after a clump of human hair was found in Smirnova's hand. Thai authorities submitted the sample to DNA testing and didn't disclose the result, but they did report to have found an extremely elevated level of alcohol in the victim's blood. Jamal Smith from the US and Jordanian man Ahmad Alatoum, both in their 30s, were arrested along with Russian model Natalia Kozankova. All 3 of them were charged with recklessness causing death, for which they each faced 10 years in prison if convicted. 35-year-old Kozankova called Smirnova's death an unfortunate incident but denied that she'd been murdered. She also maintained to have met the victim at the party and accused Smirnova's friend Alatoum of having behaved inappropriately on the night. The latter was taken into custody while in the process of booking a flight out of Thailand, and like the others, was suspected to have had a hand in Smirnova's death, although the extent of his involvement in the incident was still being investigated. Number 3. Hawaii helicopter crash. At around 5 p.m. on June the 8th of 2022, a Bell 407 helicopter left the Paradise Helicopters base at Ellison Onizuka Kona International Airport on the island of Hawaii. The early stages of the flight unfolded normally, but after about half an hour, the aircraft experienced a violent upset, followed by an uncontrollable spin to the right. One of the 5 passengers would later report seeing a piece fall off the aircraft, but couldn't identify what it was. The helicopter continued to spin during its erratic descent and eventually crashed into a lava field between Ranchos Subdivision and South Point Road. One of its occupants then placed an emergency call. The pilot was severely injured and had to be extricated from the mangled wreck, photos of which were picked up by multiple media outlets. In the days that followed, the crash was still being investigated as of the latest updates, but no fatalities were reported. Travelers Clay Watson, an auto dealer from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and his daughters Kennedy and Clayton were identified as being among the injured passengers. Number 2. Sylwia Radź. 23-year-old Polish tourist Sylwia Radź from Lublin was visiting a landmark bridge called Puente de Triana in the southern Spanish city of Seville in the fall of 2014. The trip was, according to Radź's mother, a dream come true for the nursing student who'd reportedly taught herself Spanish and hoped to work in the country in the future. She wanted to mark the trip by taking a selfie on the bridge, which was built in the mid-19th century and often frequented by tourists. While balancing on a ledge and adjusting her position for the photo, Radź slipped and fell 15 feet. She impacted the concrete footings of the bridge and went into cardiac arrest. Emergency workers were able to revive her at the scene, but the young woman later succumbed to her injuries in a local hospital. Number 1. Egypt shark attacks. In July of 2022, 2 tourists were mauled to death by sharks at the Egyptian Bay of Sal Hashish, south of the Hurghada tourist hub. English-speaking guests had warned lifeguards at the beach that they'd spotted the predatory fish in the water, but were reportedly laughed off after being told there were no sharks at the bay and had never been. Roughly 15 minutes later, 68-year-old Austrian tourist Elizabeth Sauer was attacked while snorkeling in the coastal waters. The mauling was caught on video by terrified onlookers, and the woman tried to fight off the shark, reported as an oceanic white tip, but ended up losing an arm and a leg. She was nevertheless able to get back to shore with the help of a flipper. Sauer was given CPR at the scene, but later went into shock and died at a local hospital. On the same day, the badly disfigured remains of a Romanian tourist, 40-year-old Roxana Donesan, were discovered on a nearby reef. She was believed to have been killed in a manner similar to Sauer and was found only 650 feet from the site of the other attack. However, according to the reports of another tourist, Donesan had disappeared from the 5-star Premier Le Rêve hotel 2 days prior. That aspect invited speculation that she might have been the first victim and sparked rumors of a local cover-up attempt, as none of the beaches had been closed and no warnings had been released in the aftermath. The authorities only took the appropriate measures after Sauer's death, which had occurred in a much more public manner than Donesan's. According to local guides, the heightened shark activity had been caused by a transport of sheep, which had sunk, resulting in the animals drowning and attracting the predators. Thanks for watching. Would you rather travel freely anywhere in the world without any border restrictions, or never have to pay for gas? Let us know in the comments section below.